lot of shows come up with something of an interesting concept or theme for their topic that is unique, it is original, but they don't really take it far enough. They tepidly dip their toe in the water and it's like there's something there, but they haven't really leaned fully into it.
I can see what they're doing with the theme. I get it, but I wonder if the show would have more appeal if they went in a slightly different direction.
They talk about this, so, here's what makes us different from other podcasts. We're going to keep it real. We're going to tell you the truth. We're going to talk about failures and how to avoid them.
I see this a lot, and it almost always devolves into cliches. Like, here, we keep it real. You got to show us. What is this show? What is the essence? Who is this for? And what angle do you have that is going to draw me in?
Welcome to another podcast roast where in every episode we dissect one of our listeners' show's packaging to help them improve their show's discovery and new listener acquisition and help you do the same. And today on the skewer, we have the show Monster in My Closet, Workplace Fears and Follies by Anil Saxena and Morgan Hunter. So Justin, as you pull up the show here in Spotify, walk us through your first impressions.
Okay. Sometimes I've taken a little bit more of a peek at something before we start recording. This one I have not looked at all. So the artwork, I'm not sure how I feel about the artwork. It's like a red monster devil, and then overhead there's a light. And
it's like the light bulb icon, kind of like from Flat Icon or something.
It kind of evokes a feeling of like maybe like childhood spookiness. Like this might be a monster that you see on a children's show or something.
Yep.
And Monster in My Closet evokes kind of that same feeling. It's like, okay, the artwork in that first part of the title match, but Workplace Fears and Follies is weird to me. It's not what I expected from the artwork or from the first part of that title. The title doesn't really communicate to me like workplace. There's also this weird pairing of My Closet, which is personal and at home, with Workplace Fears and Follies, which is away from home and the office.
Yeah.
So, those are some initial thoughts. What about you?
Yeah, well, the other thing that I would point out immediately that jumps out to me from the cover art is that there's no text on it at all. And so it's just this little illustration with the red monster, like jet black background, and then this light bulb kind of casting a spotlight almost down on it. And the other thing about the artwork is that it feels like this is probably self-designed. It's not professionally designed. I don't get the sense. I don't know where this monster would have come from that they've got here, but like the light bulb is clearly like an icon that you can pull from online and just insert into your designs. And so I think it just comes across as not super tight and kind of legitimate, to borrow a word that Jay Klaus has kind of, at least for me, kind of popularized. And I really like this word because I always used to use the word professional for design, but I think that that's not actually quite what we're talking about here. And to talk through Jay's kind of articulation of this word of legitimate, it's kind of like if somebody comes across this and this is their first impression, does this make them think, oh, this is likely going to be worth my time? And I think that, with the cover art, people probably know this is a podcast, but they don't see any text on the cover. And so I think that's a bit of a red flag. And then the visuals as well. Like, I think you can have a podcast cover art that doesn't have any text. I don't know that I've seen many examples of that, but I could imagine that there could be an instance of that where it actually does look super legitimate and it actually really draws you in. But I don't think that this cover art is achieving that here. And then kind of like you mentioned, the title itself adds, it gets to some clarity in the second half of it, but I don't know that that's actually part of the title. It's more like in the show listing. I don't think they would go to a conference and say, we're the host of Monster in My Closet, Workplace Fears and Follies. I think they would say, we host a show called Monster in My Closet, which is totally opaque.
Yeah, and let's get into the description here. Dive into Monster in My Closet, Workplace Fears and Follies, where we unravel the spooky side of office dynamics. Our hosts, experienced in business and talent strategy, dissect complex leadership challenges, the nuances of giving and receiving feedback, and common startup pitfalls. Each episode delivers actionable insights paired with a dose of humor, empowering you to transform workplace fears into wins. Join us for candid discussion that cut through corporate politics and equip you with the tools for success. Subscribe and turn workplace woes into triumphs.
Hmm.
Okay. I mean, here, one thing that I think all of this messaging did evoke for me is that feeling of lying in bed at night with anxiety or fear about work.
Yeah.
And I think that is a powerful emotion to tap into. My wife and I have these situations weekly. It's like there's something at work that's stressing us out, or something at work we're scared to face, and it keeps us up. We dread having a conversation, or we dread having to confront something, or we dread having to dive into a certain problem. And I think those are powerful emotions. And it's like this podcast is almost there, like Monster in My Closet kind of gets at that. It's like, yeah, like what keeps you up at night when it comes to work, or what are you scared of confronting at work?
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite hit the nerve.
That's what I'm getting a bit of a sense of here as well, where with some of those words here that they've got in the description, so we unravel the spooky side of office dynamics. I'm like, okay, now I've got a couple of points here where I'm like, okay, we've got the monster on the cover art, we've got the spooky side, and I'm like, okay, my brain's starting to imagine there's a theme here, and this is actually really
Yeah.
interesting. There's this idea of the rule of three, which is prevalent in art and copywriting and all kinds of things, where like groups of three tend to feel right together. And one of the explanations for why it works is that a pairing of two things is the minimum number of elements to set up a pattern. And so here, what's happening in my brain is I think I'm projecting a bit, which is a good thing. It's like, okay, we got monster, we got spooky office politics. So now I'm kind of like, okay, I kind of see where this is going, but then it doesn't actually feel like it heads in the direction I think it's going. And so it's kind of
Yeah.
like cut that off and left me hanging a bit where,
Yeah.
you know, if I do start to look down at some of the episode titles, I see the most recent one is Love Your Zombie, reviving the undead workforce. So here, actually, maybe that theme does continue. And so we do have some kind of theme here. I think that I would have really integrated that into the description a lot more, where we make some references to spooky type of stuff throughout and like really lean into it. And I think that this is something that a lot of shows come up with something of an interesting concept or take or theme for their topic that is unique, it is original, but they don't really take it far enough. They like tepidly dip their toe in the water and it's like there's something there, but they haven't really leaned fully into it. And actually, this calls to mind an example. I came across this from Louis Grenier and his newsletter, Stand the Fuck Out. And he had an example just a couple weeks ago of a brand. I think they're called Dark Horse. I think their website is darkhorse.co. And let's head over there. And this is a kind of pay-per-click advertising agency. And they have taken their
Yeah.
theme to the extreme end. And so they've gone for this kind of like macabre horror kind of vibe here. And it's just like everything about this is like, okay, if that's the theme, we're going to the far end of that with every single touch point that we have. And so you look at their copy, their imagery, everything about the brand is like, okay, we have come up with this concept and we're going to like embody that fully. And I think that, this is an extreme example of like a really bold concept here that this brand has taken on. But I think that, whatever your concept is or whatever your theme is for your show, like this is kind of the extreme. Like once you land on something that has promise, it's like you have to take it to the edge of it.
The danger is that you could be evoking a feeling that actually doesn't fit your subject matter. So when I
Yep.
hear the spooky side of Office blank, I'm thinking, oh, this is like a horror show about, stuff that happens at the office, which could be fascinating.
Mhm.
If this was a fiction horror show or a nonfiction true crime show. But this is like a theme that they're layering on top of a topic, which is workplace fears and follies.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like those go together. To me, it's like, as soon as I hear spooky, I'm like, okay, well, that leads me one direction. And as soon as I hear, like, oh, we're going to tackle workplace fears, that doesn't feel spooky to me. That's not spooky. That's not like I'm walking into the office going, oh my God, there's going to be a jump scare here. It's more like, okay, there's some stuff I'm scared to face at the office. again, I can see what they're doing with the theme. Love your zombie, reviving the undead workforce. Like, I get it. I get it. But I wonder if the show would have more appeal if they went in a slightly different direction.
I think the other thing too is sometimes it takes a while to find out how your theme really like how it needs to fit together, and you got to kind of feel your way into that. And so I could see that there is something here about that idea of fear around work. Like there is a kernel here that could be built around. And it might be that the current kind of articulation of cover art and title and like even the word spooky, like you could change the word spooky to something else that's has a bit of a different connotation, but it
Yeah.
still revolves around fear, and there
Yeah.
could be something there. And I think the other thing that goes into this is, the title and the cover art. Usually, those are the first touch points that somebody has with a show, and they essentially set the frame that somebody goes into viewing everything else with. And so, by switching up the cover art and or the title, you actually might ground people in more of the practical nature of this show. And so, I think that with imagery on the cover art, that's a great way to do it. That can really shift how somebody perceives the show or what their expectation is going in. So that would
Yeah.
be something else to kind of think about.
Yeah, and it maybe they've just chosen the wrong image, which is monster in the closet is the image they chose, where they could play off other kind of fear-based titles like this is bad, but there's the movie Arachnophobia, Office Phobia evokes a different feeling and image and is probably a little bit better than Monster in My Closet. It just to me those it doesn't fit as well. So there might be another play on words that they could use that would be more effective, I think, and still keep this theme of fear and the horror of going to the office, and then you can playfully incorporate these elements kind of throughout. But it shows like how careful. Like I totally get where they were going here. They're like, oh, like this is such a fun twist on this topic, and they're right. Like there is something fun about it, but uh, I think by going in this monster in my closet direction, it was just not quite hitting the mark.
I think that one of the things that is maybe a little bit missing here in terms of the title and description that I hadn't thought about on the first read through is that the idea like monster in my closet feels a little bit confusing off the bat, and it isn't really explained in the description. And I think that that's something that okay, like what is the metaphorical closet here? Like that's not really addressed.
Yeah,
We've said like spooky, but I think that if they have a clear kind of vision for themselves around like what is the monster in the closet here, and they laid that out in the maybe first or second sentence of the description, maybe we would be like, oh, that makes total sense and this is the perfect analogy here. But they've kind of just like tied it loosely into the theme of fear and spookiness without addressing like what is the monster in my closet. I mean, the other issue I think with this title, especially with the cover art that's not clear at all, is that obviously closet has a lot of connotations outside of monster in my closet. And so when I first saw this, I thought that this was maybe a show about kind of like LGBTQIA issues in some way. Like that was the
mm,
first place my mind went because that's the most common usage of the word closet in culture as a whole. And so that
yeah.
planted me there. And then I had to kind of backtrack and be like, oh, wait, okay, for workplace fears and follies, and then you're still kind of like, okay, what's going on here? And so I think
Yeah.
that you have to be careful with some of the wording that you choose because it can really take somebody and anchor them in one place, and you don't want to have to then like reel them back and be like, no, 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 like actually this it's about this thing over here.
And this is none of this is easy. This is why branding is hard. It's
Yeah.
and we're never going to get it completely right. Why don't we listen to the trailer? I think we might get some more clues there, and even unclear branding with a strong recommendation.
Yeah.
Unclear branding can still be fine. If someone gets to the page or the profile on a podcast app and then gets to the trailer, you can still convince them to listen. So let's give this trailer a listen.
All right.
3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody. We just wanted to give you a little insight about why you should be listening to Monster in My Closet because you should. So, Morgan, what makes us different from other podcasts?
We're going to keep it real. We're going to tell you the truth. We're going to talk about failures and how to avoid them. And we're going to talk about the reality of how difficult it can be to do your thing in corporate America as a business leader or an entrepreneur. There's so many kind of crazy, hard, laborious things that need to be done in business, and people never talk about those because they're not sexy, right? So people get this unrealistic idea about business being easy, and if I just show up and want it bad enough, it's going to happen. And we know that's
Okay.
not true,
Um,
but we want to give you
yeah,
real.
what are your thoughts? I mean, I could tell you what I was hoping for was a little dramatic, like, ooh,
Yeah.
do you stay up late at night thinking about your work at, like something that like
Yeah.
incorporates some of this fear and spookiness and even like again, where Monster in the Closet made sense for me was when I'm home at night trying to sleep, this is the monster in my closet. My workplace fears and anxieties are in the closet and
Yeah.
they're just right there keeping me up. But I didn't quite get any of that in that first minute there.
No, I mean, a few things stood out to me. I think the first is that the audio quality is not great. I think
Yeah.
the lack of music that's okay, but then paired with the kind of recording quality sounds like maybe it was done over like laptop mics or something like that. There's some like shuffling of stuff in the background that just doesn't quite feel super well produced. So that stood out to me. That was the first kind of impression that has nothing to do with the actual content, but it
Mhm.
does register. And then as I'm kind of reading back through the transcript here, which is kind of nice that Spotify has here, I think this first what I want at the start of the teaser, it kind of feels a little almost too familiar, kind of like it's already assumed that we have some relationship or something. Like I want to be hooked right away. I don't want to be
Mhm.
told like, here's why you should listen to this. That feels a little bit too blunt. I think I want to hear more of kind of like a question or a statement that really speaks to me and like lands more emotionally. And so I'm like, oh, they get my situation. Like maybe how I would start this would be like have a scripted narrative piece that's like it's Sunday, it's 8 p.m. and you feel that
Mhm.
feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's the Sunday
Yeah.
scaries, and you're already imagining that tomorrow at work, you're going to have that conversation, do that thing, whatever that other thing is. And we list off a few things where now I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm already like feeling myself tensing up because like these are all the things I'm thinking about. And then they
Yeah.
kind of unravel that and say, on this show, we're actually going to help you work through those by doing XYZ. And so then they explain how the show will help, me mitigate that feeling and maybe eradicate it for good or something like that. So
Yeah.
that stood out to me. And then the one other note that I had here was that they talk about this. So, here's what makes us different from other podcasts. But they followed up with like, we're going to keep it real. We're going to tell you the truth. We're going to talk about failures and how to avoid them. And we're going to talk about the reality of how difficult it can be to do your thing in corporate America or as a business leader. And those may be things that are not commonplace in any one person's individual office, but those are basically the norm in podcasts about business. And like
Mm.
I feel like I have seen basically that same description for almost every single leadership podcast that I've ever come across. And so we want to be able to say, and this is something that I've certainly done in the past with probably my first website, saying like the number one, whatever photography website blog in Vancouver, BC was probably some kind of headline that I had
Mhm.
back in the day. And, it looks sexy to put that on your website, but that doesn't make it true. And people can pick up on that. And especially when there
Mhm.
are other signs like, the cover art or confusing title. And so I think coming in here, what we all need to do is we actually need to listen to all the other shows on our topic. And this is something that I take like all my clients through. It's like, this is one of your first assignments. It's like, go listen to the top 5 or top 10 other shows in your niche, the biggest ones. And like actually in a spreadsheet, like write down, okay, what's their angle? Who is their specific audience? Like, are their episodes long or short? How often did they release? What is their kind of theme or tone? And you actually get this picture and you begin to see, oh, all these shows all present themselves the same way. And it becomes a bit of a cliche. And so what I want to do is actually go as far away from that as possible and do something kind of radically different. And it doesn't mean that I
Mhm.
need to be like the best technical like production quality. It's like I just need to do something different. And if you do that, like that's the majority of what it takes to actually stand out and get people to choose you over all these other shows that they're like, oh, I can't pick among any of these. They all just look the same. And if yours looks radically different, which they've got some foundation for that here, but it's not coming through in the teaser, that kind of idea of the fear and the scariness.
Mhm. I think there's also an element of show don't tell. Like,
Mm-hmm.
of course, you want to communicate what makes this podcast different, but I
Yeah.
don't think giving people a list of what makes this podcast different is actually that compelling. It's
Yeah.
like, no, I just give me the essence. Like, show me what makes this podcast special in the content, in the dialogue. I see this a lot in people's descriptions and other things like, and it almost always devolves into cliches. Like,
Yeah.
here we keep it real. Well, it's like, okay, well, every podcast is keeping it real. You
Yeah.
got to show us, what is this show? Like, what is the essence? Who is this for? And what angle do you have that is going to draw me in?
Yeah.
How can we touch that nerve and really hit it? So it's like, when you're at the dentist and they get that nerve and you're like, that's kind of the experience you want, but in a good way. It's like, yes, this is exactly the kind of stuff I want to hear about.
And I think, to go back to something I mentioned before, I think that, a lot of times we start podcasts based on our immediate surroundings. And if your immediate surrounding is not the online kind of space where, I think you and I are like super plugged into content in general. We consume a ton. And so we're just very aware of what's out there. But I know a lot of people, they have their friends group who are like not creators. They're not online business owners. They're like, just normal people who are living normal lives. And like, we're the weirdos who are like, yeah, we want to create something and put it online. And like, we have these bigger ambitions. And so almost anything by virtue of that, like anything we create is already kind of out there for our circumstances. But by choosing to submit our creations online and trying to build an audience around that, we are now competing with all content that has ever been created all across the world. And so like, that's when we say like, we're doing things differently. It's like, that's what we need to differentiate from. And so it really just goes back to this idea of like, okay, we need to be plugged into our spaces, being able to look for like, where are people underserved? What aren't they getting from the existing business leadership shows, or, whatever that they see their kind of core topic as, because like a lot of times, like there is a fantastic option already available. And if that is meeting people's needs and doing the job perfectly, then it's kind of like, well, okay, that show maybe has like 500 reviews and they have a big audience. And so they got all the social proof. And so if we're just going to do kind of the same thing or a similar thing, then, why would somebody pick us? And again,
Mm-hmm.
I do think they've got an interesting kind of thing going here with this idea around the theme, and that does differentiate it. But I want to see it like vertically aligned, like every touch point, it is just like hammered in that this is the theme. And again, we can talk about some of the specific framing and language, but that's my kind of thoughts on it.
On the positive side, I feel like, their rapport, they felt friendly, they felt
Mm-hmm.
approachable, it felt real. And even with some editing, I think this trailer could have been better, tightening it up, making it a lot more punchy. They've got a reasonable foundation in that it's like, well, okay, I would listen to these people talk about
Mm-hmm.
topics, but I think the trailer could definitely do a better job of drawing people in. And what's challenging about producing any sort of content is you're trying to connect with the momentum that is out there in the world that is
Mm-hmm.
already happening. And so, what is the predominant feeling right now? And how can I connect with that? So, like right now, I think universally, when I talk to people about work and anxiety, lots of people have this fear that they're going to get laid off. And
Yeah.
so connecting with those emotions, like that's how the realness of the show, like we keep it real. It's like having those moments, having that emotion, and really picking the topics and the momentum and what's out there in the culture that could drive interest, and then just using that to draw people in. It's like, we
Yeah.
get you. We understand what's happening. One place I go for inspiration for these kinds of things is like Reddit, like
Mm-hmm.
just going and seeing the kinds of things people are posting in different subreddits. You'll get that real, like how people are feeling at work, how people are feeling about their jobs, about, their fears and anxieties related to the office. And I would be grabbing that language and incorporating it into everything, into the description, into my trailer episode. Like you could even start with just a quote from Reddit, you
Yeah.
know, like it's 2 a.m. and I have this irrational fear that tomorrow morning my boss is going to lay me off.
Yep.
Already it's like, whoa, that's real. That's powerful. That I want to know, okay, what next? That is the emotion. That's the thought that you want listeners to have when they start listening to your trailer and when they start listening to your episode. So you set it up and you're like, what next? Like, what happens? Where are they going to go with this? You're staying tuned in because you want to know, where does this lead? Either through the arc of a season or through the arc of an episode.
I'm just scrolling through some of the episode titles and the descriptions here, and like they do a really good job with their descriptions actually as well, and keeping to the theme. And so
Mhm.
it is surprising to me that, again, it doesn't come through in the description or in the teaser, because it seems like they've really been intentional about the majority of their episode titling and also how they're using their descriptions, which are way more interesting than almost any other descriptions that we've roasted here. And so I think they're doing a fantastic job there. But yeah, I would be curious to listen through a number of episodes and actually get a sense of like, how does this theme show up? And I think that one of the things, we don't have time to listen through all the episodes on these roasts here, but what I would give some advice here, not having listened to this, so maybe they're already doing it, is we want that theme to be apparent from the second we click play. And so kind of like you were expecting from the teaser, we want that spooky music. And like there's all these
Mhm.
elements that we can use to enforce that. And maybe we put on a bit of that voice. Like the great thing about having a theme that is based on something else is you can just pull on that thing and say like, okay, well, like, okay, this idea, okay, undeads, zombies, like how would that apply to the workforce? And you're like, oh, actually, that's a pretty good metaphor. And I can actually find something to that. And so you can actually get all of this inspiration when you have this theme that's pretty broad, and you can be like, okay, what if we looked at like Edgar Allan Poe's the Raven, and it's like, how
Mhm.
does that apply? What would the analogy be to that? And you could actually look at it and be like, you don't have any ideas. Then you start thinking about it, and you're like, oh, actually, there's something here, and then you could like take something else. And so it's really great as a content ideation, but you just want to like make sure that that's grounded and that from the second somebody clicks play through the end, like you're on brand, you're on theme, and they're getting like an experience out of it.
Yeah, like this line, beware the cobwebbed corners of corporate corridors where the
Yeah.
shadows of miscommunication loom large. That is excellent. I do
Yeah.
love that. Where we expose the chilling practice of the employment bait and switch. So that even there kind of has me going, what next? Okay, where's this going? Like,
Yep.
what is the bait and switch? Like there's these open loops that they've introduced there. Unravel the spooky saga of employees thrust into roles they never signed up for. Wow. Like, what is this? Like I want to know the story. I want to hear, what happens here. So yeah, they've done a good job here, and maybe just need to bring some of that into the trailer. Great thing about a trailer episode is you can replace the audio file on that trailer. So you can just upload a new audio file, record something new, edit something new, and now that's the new version of your trailer that people are listening to. So I would revisit the trailer, try to bring in some of these elements you've got in these episode descriptions.
The other thing on the trailer note is it actually shows up in their feed as they actually published it yesterday from the time we were recording this one day ago. And so it looks like they have somewhere between maybe 15 and 20 episodes. So they're just, still kind of in the early days of the show, but it looks like they didn't have a trailer originally and now they've added one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you can kind of backdate the episode and so that it actually shows up at the bottom.
You
It doesn't.
can, yeah.
Yeah, I would do that and just set the episode number to 1, and set it as a trailer as well, and so that it does go back to the start of the feed. Because sometimes people will scroll back. In a lot of apps, it will show up, like here it's in Spotify and Apple Podcasts, they do spotlight it, but in a lot of mobile apps, people expect it to be at the very bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and so they might scroll back to get it there, and so I would not kind of bury it in the middle of the feed. So that would be another thing that I would do with the trailer.
By the way, this title, listen to this. Click play on the Curse of Conflict Avoidance. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin.
That first 40 seconds.
Yep.
So good. That should be the trailer right there. That should be the beginning of the trailer. That was much better than this kind of casual off the cuff, not really edited. And even the script makes way more sense, you know?
Yep.
So kudos for that intro. I think you want to move that same feel to the trailer episode. And yeah, I think you'll see as people listen to the trailer, you're going to get more people drawn in to the show.
That's great. We stand corrected on a lot of our feedback. So I'm glad we listened to that, because that feels much more, that brought a smile to my face. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. And so I think, in basically that intro, a lot of that language I would apply to their actual show description as well. And just like lean into the theme, like they're already doing it in the episode descriptions, bring that same voice and tone to the show description. And that, I think, aligns everything a lot more clearly. Because right now it kind of felt like this idea, we're not quite clear on the cover. It feels like everything like at the episode level is actually really solid. But it's at the show level where it's a bit more like you come in and you're like, wait, what's going on here? I'm not quite sure what this is.
And this just shows there's multiple entry points into a show. Some people are going to see the title and it's going to intrigue them. Some people are going to read the description. Some people are going to look at an episode. Some people are going to click play on your latest episode. Some people are going to click play on your trailer. There's all sorts of entry points that you have to have dialed because you never know where people are going to come into a show. After all of that, we clicked play on an episode and it's like, okay, this feels a little bit more engaging. And I think, incorporating those elements into the description, title, cover art, that's where I would tighten things up and re-record that trailer for sure.
Yeah, I think, the more time we spent with the show, the deeper we got here into the actual episode, then I kind of felt like, okay, now, I had a lot of confusion at the start, kind of not quite sure about the show. Now, having listened to that little bit, I'm like, okay, they actually do have a lot of solid pieces here. So I think it's kind of just bringing that everywhere else and kind of integrating that. I would look at, cover art, at the very least, getting some text on the cover art, maybe thinking about the title. And then the other thing I did notice there in that episode intro was still, I think the audio quality on the mics could be improved, and that would set a better first impression for people, especially because you're already doing this kind of production with the music and kind of like you're playing into it. And so, I think I would make the most of that and really kind of not give people a reason to doubt whether this is, sufficient quality. So sounds like they've got some great things here to build upon, some kind of things to clean up as well. But if you would like to have your show potentially roasted, you can follow in the footsteps of Anil and Morgan and leave a review for our show, Podcast Marketing Trends Explained, in Apple Podcasts, and just leave the name of your show there, and we will potentially add it to the skewer for an upcoming roast.